The Victorian era was a very interesting point in time that was filled with all sorts of strange inventions. While some ideas managed to stand the test of time, these creations just never seemed to catch on. First on our list is the writing stabilizer. This one would certainly be useful if you needed perfect handwriting or were just perpetually lazy. The writing stabilizer was a long rod that had a special part for attaching to the back of someone's seat. It also had a long paper holder that was attached to the other end of the rod that sat right in front of a person's face. This ensured that a person had a hard surface to write on while they were traveling by train. Locomotives in the Victorian era were obviously not as smooth as the ones we have today, so this was seen as a cure for messy writing on the go. It was a pretty decent idea at first, but the actual item itself must have been a real pain to carry around. There were multiple parts that needed to be assembled, and it probably wasn't the easiest thing in the world to attach to the back of a seat. But if there was a task that needed to be completed before you arrived at your destination, it could actually be worth it. Up next is the rolling bridge. Now this one is just plain weird. A bridge that was attached to a track that could roll from one spot to the next. It's such an unnecessary solution to a problem that never existed, but people in the Victorian era were just keen to invent anything that could make a quick buck. While pretty much every other bridge is built to stay in one place, the rolling bridge could move between different locations. They were usually built to cross over rivers and other bodies of water, but there was just no reason why anyone couldn't just cross at the exact same point as everybody else. These rolling bridges also weren't very stable, so they were hardly ever used. The build quality and the fragile tracks meant that this invention was just a disaster waiting to happen. Somebody must have thought this was a groundbreaking invention back in the day, but the reality is that it was pretty silly and just flat out unnecessary. Next on our list is electric jewelry. When you think of 1800s fashion inventions, it doesn't really get more Victorian than this. People were coming up with all sorts of weird new fashion trends, but electric jewelry was quite possibly the most outlandish of the bunch. Some people were actually experimenting with small lights that could be placed inside rings or necklaces that would really stand out at a lavish party. This would be an easy way to show everyone that you were the king or queen of style and were setting new trends. Now obviously in an era where electricity wasn't readily available to everybody, an invention like this would have cost an arm and a leg. This meant that electric jewelry was really only attainable for the richest people in the land, made it extremely hard to sell. It's also a bit of a mystery if you could even turn the lights off, and this could have caused a ton of problems. It would be rather awkward sitting in a formal gathering while your light up ring is flashing uncontrollably. After that, we have the multi-purpose cane. Canes were incredibly popular in the Victorian era. Nowadays, people will only use them if they absolutely have to, but these walk-in devices were seen as a real fashion symbol back in the day. Some people were even looking to cash in on the traditional cane by turning it into a multi-purpose tool. Inventors are coming up with all sorts of crazy ideas for the simple canes that range from musical instruments to smoking devices. That's right, if you happen to be walking down the street and decide that a song was about to break out, you could use your cane as a flute. On top of that, other people were attaching nets to their canes for catching bugs and equipping special brushes to use on their horses. Now, some of these were just flat out weird, but the umbrella cane was actually the best one of the bunch. You would never have to be worried about being caught out in the rain if your unassuming cane could transform at the drop of a hat. Speaking of hats, here we have the air-conditioned top hat. Another problem that people were trying to solve in this day and age was a way to beat the summer heat. It wasn't really customary to go outside in a t-shirt and shorts in the Victorian era, so inventors really had to get creative when it came to cooling people down. When you look at the classic top hat, this seemed like the perfect place to hide a special cooling device. The air-conditioned hat essentially had a small vent that would allow the top of someone's head to breathe during the summer heat. This undoubtedly would have been very popular with anyone who wore hats on a daily basis, and honestly, it's not that bad of an idea. It seems pretty ridiculous nowadays, but inventors likely sold a good amount of these hats back in the 1800s. Now obviously this was another invention that just lost out as technology advanced, so it wouldn't really make any sense to bring this back anytime soon. Unless of course you want to try and start some kind of weird new steampunk fashion trend. Next on our list is the Spherical Velocipede. Transportation was something that was being heavily studied in the Victorian era. Horse and carriage and bicycles were by far the preferred ways for people to get around town, but another invention was aiming to change the game. The Spherical Velocipede had a very interesting design that was just as crazy as it sounded. This was basically a rod that you could pedal that was enshrined in a large transparent sphere. The idea behind this was that you could ride it like a bicycle, but you'd be in your own little space without having to worry about anyone else around you. You could also be protected from the elements if it started to rain, but the negatives started to outweigh the positives. These were big and bulky and hard to maneuver, and fixing them was a real pain. You would likely have to buy a new one if anything went wrong, so the cost effectiveness of this invention just never really hit the mark. Next is the stamp licker. Now this one actually did make quite a bit of sense, but it came in some unusual forms. The stamp licker was quite useful for any business or individual that was sending a lot of mail. Long before the age of the internet, written letters were still the most common form of communication, so the demand for stamps and envelopes was very high. The only issue was that many people would get exhausted from licking stamps all day. Not only that, but the adhesive that was being used on a lot of the stationery items was not always safe. Some of them contained some very deadly toxins, so the stamp licker ensured that you never had to use your tongue. Some of these items came in the form of a roller that would wet the stamp, while others had multi-purpose functionality. Some of the stamp lickers were small sticks that could also use the moisture and adhesive to wet the inside of an envelope for maximum sticking power. This was a decent invention with slightly unconventional execution. Our next invention is the artificial leech. Yes, this is exactly what it sounds like. In an era where many doctors are using leeches for bloodletting, there ended up being a widespread shortage of leeches. Doctors and other medical professionals were in need of the small creatures, and they needed them fast to help treat their patients. While many people were taking up jobs as leech collectors in the Victorian era, others were coming up with devices that could eliminate the middleman. This leech shortage prompted the creation of the artificial leech that served one single purpose. The small cylindrical device would essentially bite a person's skin and suck the blood out of them. Doctors saw this as an effective method for removing any diseases and bad cells that did not belong in a person's body. Perhaps they did get some use out of this creation for a little while, but modern science moved well beyond this very strange invention. After that, we have fork scissors. Fizzers, sorks, you can pretty much call these things whatever you'd like, and it wouldn't make them any less bizarre. The fork scissors were invented during an era where dinner parties and fancy functions were all the rage. These would have been the perfect places to show off your latest advancement in cutlery and prove to everybody that the utensil had multiple functions. But you could obviously just use it as a normal fork. The small handles and the additional blade allowed this utensil to operate as a pair of scissors as well. This could be used for cutting any thick foods like steak without the use of a traditional knife. Now, sadly, this invention seems like another solution to a problem that never existed, likely just made the dinner more complex than it had to be. It probably wouldn't be the most comfortable thing to use either when you just want to pick up your food with the fork while the scissors keep flying out by mistake. And finally, we have the Omni Cooker. Here we have what is probably the earliest take on the modern day microwave. While almost every household has a microwave these days, the common household item did have some growing pains hundreds of years ago. The Omni Cooker was supposed to be an easy way for people to cook everything from meats to eggs on the go, but it just never materialized. There were two large chambers that were heated from the bottom to cook the foods as quickly as possible, but this item was just a massive fire hazard. They weren't the sturdiest things in the world, and they were also very big for what they were supposed to be. This really made the idea of cooking on the go incredibly obsolete, and there's a good chance that these things might have been banned anyways. Imagine someone in the back of a pub jamming a steak into a large box and lighting the whole building on fire in the process. That just doesn't sound like a very fun time for anybody. Well, that does it for a look at the bizarre Victorian era inventions that make no sense. We hope you enjoyed all of these weird creations, and we'll see you all next time. The Victorian era was a very interesting point in time that was filled with all sorts of strange inventions. That just doesn't sound like a very fun time for anybody. Well, that does it for a look at the bizarre Victorian era inventions that make no sense. We hope you enjoyed all of these weird creations, and we'll see you all next time.